Nice ending. I want you to teach me that lick. Welcome to another guitar show, and what we just played was the January Blues. We have the January Blues at the moment, but it won't last too long. But this is such a great time of year to spend a little bit more time practicing your guitar, thinking of some goals that you want to be able to achieve on guitar this year, and we're going to help you to do just that. This is going to be much more of a Q&A episode. I posted a couple of days ago on my Facebook page and Instagram a couple of asking you guys for questions that you wanted to know to help you guys to play guitar. What are you struggling with generally with regards to getting better and making progress on guitar, but a little bit of everything as well. One of the best ones that we got was quite a few people on the Facebook group, Jesse Smith, Lee Holmes and Braden McRae, who the feed started with Jesse Smith struggling to bridge the gap between beginner, improver and intermediate, and then the rest of the guys basically agreeing with that and wanting some help there. I want to first of all say that the improver level, I think people are pretty clear what beginner and intermediate is. Improver level is something that I added to bridge the gap between those a little more, because what I found was when we just simplified everything to just beginner, which I would class as open chords, generally C, G, etc., and simple strumming, and then you could have plenty of beginner style riffs in there. It's not that there's no single notes, but that's generally what we class as a beginner song. And then an intermediate player who's suddenly starting to solo, playing bar chords, playing rhythms, 16th rhythms we would probably say, learning harder songs. For the students that I was teaching and that I have taught over that, I've been doing this for 10 years now, just on YouTube as well. It was all becoming too much at once. So I was like, right, how can we break this down and what do you have to do first? And typically what I found was it was the chords, so learning just bar chords, but sticking with simple strumming, or covering the bar chords and little cheating ways to do it. So for example, a great one is rather than going for the full F chord, we can go for this hybrid F, which you'll be very aware of. And there are many different ways to kind of play that hybrid F as well, which is super, super useful, but must be learned and trained with simpler strumming and keeping everything else simple so that we can put the focus there. And there are plenty of song examples that do that as well. And I would say the other thing, so not just harder chords, I would say the other thing is structure.
Yes.
Song structure at an intermediate level can become crazy. It can become, I mean, when you're learning electric guitar, it can become riff 1, riff 2, riff 3, and then the song starts. You know what I mean? So I found that a lot of my students still didn't have the confidence with a full song that had a lot of structure in it yet. So I was like, right, let's take those two things and put that and make a new level out of it, and that's my improver level. But to keep it more simple, just for everyone watching and make this applicable as wide as possible, what suggestions do we have for a beginner guitar player or the beginners out there that are wanting to make progress, and maybe just a practice routine, some suggestions of what to work on, maybe something fresh. We both have Your Guitar Academy and myself, we all have online courses that you guys can follow and song suggestions and things like that. But what can we give you that's a little bit extra for a beginner and then for intermediate players wanting to advance from there? How long would you say a beginner should be playing for, if, for example, they can play G, C, and D?
You've said this before, a small amount every day is much better than a big amount interspersed. So I go 15 minutes a day of trying different chords.
Trying to make guitar a part of your life as a beginner. There's a real sort of I think people see it as a guitar club or a musician's club, and if you don't feel a part of that, it can be very difficult to kind of force yourself to pick up the guitar when you don't quite know if it's going to be for you, if you don't know any other people that play guitar. It's a new venture and it can be scary. So just trying to pick up the guitar even for 5 or 10 minutes and trying to do that maybe 4 or 5 days a week is a great starting point. It's what I've encouraged in most, if not all, of my beginner lessons, and that is the best way to make this part of your life. From there, for more of an intermediate player, we're looking for a similar thing, but perhaps looking for that to be closer to an hour, 4 to 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Just to give us enough time, one, to play the songs and riffs and the repertoire that we know for fun and enjoy it. You've already put in, 6 months to a couple of years or even more of playing guitar. You've got a lot of things that you can do. You should reward yourself.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I always make sure I do. For the first 5 or 10 minutes that I pick up my guitar, I play whatever comes to mind. No pressure, just whatever I'm in the mood for. And then there might be more structure to it. So what about for an intermediate player that's wanting to start soloing, maybe start finger picking, doing something that's a little bit more advanced, but still at around an intermediate level?
So I always tell people to go with, first of all, what is it you want to do? That's one thing that'll keep you motivated. So because we're in this video form, obviously I can't speak to you directly, but let's go with, like what you were saying, taking the more intermediate ideas, but starting them at a more manageable pace.
Or just adding one at a time.
Yeah, right. So let's go with bar chords. If you're going from open chords, bar chords are this big scary beast. So let's just take one. I think the easiest one is the E minor, right? So there's an open E minor. Let's transition that into a bar chord. So you might be thinking, well, I've tried that and it's really hard. You'd be right, it is. So what I always tell people is one string at a time, one step at a time. If you're struggling with the bar, let's try this. Just do the top 3. Great. If you can get that, add the next. And then the last. Or the second last. And then all 6. Okay, when you've got that...
There's a couple of principles that you're following there that I think are really important. One is you've got your elbow in.
Right,
It cannot be overstated enough how important it is having the elbow in.
The technique of it.
Which results in a couple of things happening. One, you're on the side of your first finger, so even if you're just doing this and trying to get the strings ringing out,
you'll see people.
We're on the side of the first finger rather than the fleshier bit here. Being on the side, it's a little bit harder. We're feeling the bone a bit more, much better to be pressing down with. It also puts your hand on this angle, which actually makes it, or it can make it easier for the other fingers to stretch.
Because if you look at Andy's elbow whenever he's doing it as a flat finger, there's a lot of compensation going on.
If I do this, and just stick my elbow out, suddenly that little finger is a mile away from where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And just by having the elbow in, it really, really helps.
Really
I wouldn't say any more than that, but just keeping the elbow in and then making sure that the first finger is on an angle. So not like this. It needs to be on an angle, compensating for the fact that the little finger is smaller. And even if you're doing a cheating kind of hybrid chord, don't be having your elbow out like that. It's got to be into the side.
That's a really good pointer. That's a great point.
Cures a lot of issues before we start that.
Yeah, exactly. That's
you were going from there with the bar.
So then we got all 6 strings. That is our base for all our bar chords. Now it gets a little bit harder with different chords. That's why I'm starting with the E minor, which is just where our 2 fingers are down. So we need to look at the E minor in relation to the nut. This is what your bar finger is replacing. So if we're looking at moving all of these chords, we have to always move them the same distance as they are from the bar, right? So I'm going to play a C minor and put my first finger across the nut. That gives me the distance, and then I will start sliding them across. You'll see as I move them up into different ones, they're always staying 2 frets from the bar finger. It has to stay like that, otherwise you get this mess. I don't think too many songs, I don't know, maybe you've got some songs in the library that go like that.
Not even that one, but I would say it's a lot easier to do. One of the hardest ways to play that chord is to put that same shape at the first fret and to play the F chord. It's easier to, I would say, to aim for around the middle of the neck. Frets are a lot closer. If you just look at the guitar that is hopefully in your hand while we're doing this, or the next time you have one, the frets are a lot closer together up here, much wider down here, and some guitars do have a bigger, what we call scale length, so they are much wider down here than others. So trying the F bar chord on certain guitars is pretty much the hardest, one of the hardest chords that you can play at a certain level because it's wider. Move the same shape higher up and train it here. Going for the major or minor version of it, much easier,
especially
much
with high action.
Absolutely. I would argue that the minor version of this chord is much harder because people struggle to get that third string ringing out.
Oh yeah.
That string is very tricky, and the major one is much easier because remember, you only have to, the first finger only has to hold down the strings that would otherwise be open. So these strings 3, 4 and 5 don't actually need pressing down because we've got these fingers on them, the fingers higher up. So we only need to press down the thickest string and the thinnest two, and therefore we can have kind of a little curl. And we mentioned this with the capos episode that we did last week, where the capo's slightly curved because the fretboard is curved. And just a little bit of, you know, experimenting with the feel of that, just and keeping a slight curve, not a big one, but elbow in, slight curve of that first finger, and overcompensating with fingers 2, 3 and 4, keeping right on the tips of those fingers is really great. What I encourage people to do, and what I often did when I was teaching 40 or 50 beginners every week, if we're playing E and A chords, I'd start off with just the normal E and A, and then I'd be training fingers 2, 3 and 4 while I'm just jamming along with any beginners.
And they'd be going, Andy, why am I doing like this? And you say, wait, young Padawan.
I would try and do it when they weren't noticing, and then I'd say I was just showing off. But what we can do is, you know, there's those two motions that have to happen. That first finger coming in, and then fingers 2, 3 and 4. If we can do a little bit of training with just the E and A, that really helps. But that's an awful lot on bar chords, and there are a lot of other things that people need. So how can we get a fully fleshed out practice routine that is going to help the general beginner guitarist and then a general intermediate guitar? One
thing I like to do, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this, one thing I do is take a song that they already know using the open chords. Let's say a song that's got G, C and D. I would say, okay, that's great. Let's try doing that song with only bar chords then. So we're training this kind of chord movement, and it's really tough for people who are starting out with bar chords just to play one chord, let alone change between. So I'd say
it's true, but basing something higher level like bar chord knowledge on something you can already do.
Right, exactly.
You're building on something you can already, with a song that you're confident with already. Just seeing how else we can play those chords is going to increase your guitar knowledge, and it's a great thing to do. There's always different ways to play the same chord, and that's a really bizarre thing to get your head around when, if you're not used to guitar. For example, this one E string here, which is just the open E string, there are 5 different places where you can play that same note on guitar, and they're all at the same pitch. That is the equivalent of pressing E just above middle C on a piano 5 times. It's the same note, it's the same, it's written the same way on the stage, but it's played, it has a different tonal quality, it gets duller as we go further up.
Not to be confused with octaves.
No, that's actually the same thing,
even
so
there's
no wonder
like
when you're just trying to learn through songs, and we're just trying to use songs, which I try and do and you guys try and use songs arranged easy to hard to help you guys progress and improve your guitar playing. It's hard to over-rely on that because songs do not exist to teach you anything. We are organising them in a way that they can teach you something, hopefully, and that there will be progression. But at some point, that falls down with a learner guitar player because they're not getting those core building blocks. One of those is playing the same chord in different ways.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And don't worry, and this is the thing, a lot of my students will go, but I want to play it at the same speed that I play the normal chords, the open chords.
Of course.
I say, well, it's not going to happen right away. You're training.
As we
totally
know, if anybody saw the left-handed episodes,
exactly.
The absolute beginner episodes that we uploaded, I think that will be episodes 6 and 7 or 7 and 8 or something like that, where we did acoustic and electric guitar and then we played them left-handed. So many of these little tricks we could do Bar chords was not one of them. They was uber tricky.
Really difficult.
Pulling it back to a practice routine. So what about for an intermediate player that's wanting to start soloing, maybe start finger picking, doing something that's a little bit more advanced, but still at around an intermediate level. So we're not talking modes or too crazy on scales. What would you pitch at that kind of level?
You can expand so much of what you already know just by changing things about it or trying it in different positions. Like you said, there's 5 places to play a note. That means there's 5 ways to play a scale, right? So you can make it go on taking a pentatonic even, or something slightly harder, a major scale, and playing that in 5 different finger positions. You know, it's all the exact same musical stuff.
So there's a key concept there where you were playing was it the minor pentatonic or the major pentatonic? Minor pentatonic, position 1, which I'm sure most people watching this video will have heard of before. Those same notes exist in different fretboard locations further up, but just they're like exactly the same notes. And it's a crucial building block to at some point learn the other shapes that aren't just position 1. A great way into that I would encourage, and we covered this in a blues episode not long ago, is scale extensions. Actually extending lower from the maybe thicker couple of strings, so that we're getting this note, and also perhaps extending higher up to what we'd call the top of shape 2. So we started with shape 1 and then shape 2. But why is learning all 5 shapes so important in your opinion? I have answers on this, but I want to hear yours first.
So I would say it's really important to learn because you are going to hit a wall with one position. That cannot be it forever. That simply can't. For one, you're stuck in pitches. You can't go anywhere above this. You can't get into the nice high notes.
Let me add something, which is that I was already the lead guitar player in a band before, I think I was age 16, before I'd learnt more than the first one and extensions, which is why I encourage the extensions way, because that's how I learnt it. However, pretty much every solo that I was learning used more than one position.
Right.
So there was a lot of extra knowledge that I was already playing and had memorized, because I knew these solos from memory and I was playing them in a band, but I didn't know how they connected.
Right.
So I would argue that it's not that you're trapped in position 1 from not being able to play anything more, because you can learn songs and solos.
Yeah, of course you can.
You just can't connect the dots to be able to move forward from where you're currently at without having these core shapes in, and they are core shapes.
I think this is where you and I differ in our kind of line of thinking.
Absolutely, it's true, but it's great to have that, because some people, even if they're only a beginner, are very structured learners, unless everything's written down, unless everything has a name, they struggle to remember it or move on. I was far more conceptual, I was far more shapes-based learner. So if I had a solo that, and it can't be understated that I also learnt piano before I learnt guitar. So a lot of the theory and chords and everything that applies there, I actually had already, and then I was sort of finding it on the guitar, really. So when I say I didn't know the other shapes, I could have picked any one string and played the scale on one string, because I knew what it sounded like and I knew the intervals.
Right.
So what I would argue is there's more than just the shapes. And when I was learning those, and when I teach those pentatonic shapes, where the octaves are is so important, where your root notes are. Because they change. Do you want to just demo that with the first couple of positions?
So, and this is one thing that's really key, and actually a lot of the time we learn it as this big 6-string thing, and it gets a little bit fudgy when we're trying to improvise on the fly and learn and look and see where these root notes are, right? So you've got to learn, if you're going to learn all 5 positions, which I would encourage you, you've got to learn the root note of each of the positions. So if we're talking about a G minor pentatonic, where is the G? Where is the lowest bass side of the guitar instance of
Easy
the note
to do
G?
in position 1, because it's the top and bottom notes of a piano,
Of a
power chord. Power chord.
That's it.
Piano, bar, power chord. That's the word I was looking for.
Piano.
It's just there. And then 6 and 1 is always the same note. So any note you know, on string 6
Right.
is the same there. Move that to position 2,
Now
much harder.
suddenly, our root note's there. This is
On a
the
different
lowest
finger.
instance. Right.
But it's still the same one from the previous one. So
Exactly.
again, we're linking a little.
Exactly. So you can use, if you're trying to find them in improvisation, you can use that kind of visual cue. That's my low one, so there is my high one.
So how would you practice that? How would you actually apply what we're wanting people to do?
So one thing I've been doing with my students is changing the position in a metronome practice. So I'll stick the metronome on, it'll be going in 4/4, and I'll say, after the 4th beat, when a new bar starts, you have to change to the next position.
It's a great one.
And because they're going in different patterns all the time, I'll start it from different places in the scale so they don't get comfortable. And that means you'll be like, so you're playing just a sequence of notes that come in a scale through the 2 different positions. And then, we just expand it. Can you do it with the next 2? Can you do it with 3? Can you do it with 4? Blah, blah, blah. Different pairs of them like that. And we just do that all across the neck and map it all up.
It's a really good way. Will you be able to write that up to put on the Your Guitar Academy website for us?
I could.
Because that's a good specific exercise,
Yeah.
and I think that would really help.
And knowledge of the root notes is really key when it comes to actually using it as music, because sitting here doing this is very academic. It's very
Exactly. So
edgy.
how do we make it sound musical?
Right, so then
What's
we
the
say,
link?
okay, can we add bends, slides? And kind of different rhythms to make it flow in a sense. And a lot of the time I would use solos that I've liked and kind of try to interpret what they're doing in different positions. So if you've learned a solo that's which is a root 1 masher, can you take this stuff? Can you take this stuff and move it into shape 2? Sometimes it doesn't work that well because of the finger positions. Sometimes it does. So that would be like, that's not.
That was really good.
It's
You really
cool.
kept the phrasing when you did that, and that's a very difficult thing to do.
Right.
What about people who can't quite make music from position 1 yet?
Very hard. Very hard.
A lot of these things are so much harder in the beginning.
They
aren't
are,
We
yeah.
have to admit it.
When it comes to making music, I mean, rhythm I find is what people struggle with the most. And
Yeah.
just making
Quite easy
an
for people
interesting
to go, okay, step 1, walk up and down this scale
Easy
over
to
a
do.
chord. To make that sound more musical, pause.
Right?
Straight away, just by stopping, it does not sound like a scale walking up and down. And some repetition walking up and down the same notes. That wasn't even shaking up the rhythm too much, but it sounds more like
like
a
something.
melody
Yeah.
than a scale. And that's I encourage a melodic approach with this, especially before we get too much into the rock licks. That's what I've put my work into with my courses, encouraging melody. From there, I think every melody has some kind of bigger jump,
yeah.
some octave shape. We'll be looking at this more in our next video where we're looking at rock riffs, how to write a rock riff. I'm really looking forward to that one. But to wrap up, then we start adding some bends. And a great thing to do if you're ever playing a note with your 3rd finger, typically you're going to be going for a whole bend, and you'd be thinking about where the next note is in your scale. But whole bend, half bend, start adding some stuff.
And I would add,
Really cool.
you want to learn from people who've done it. So take a solo that is nice and simple in position 1 that you like, and just try and work it out, or get some tabs and just see what they're doing in this position and copy it. All music is plagiarism. Copy it, get it into your fingers, and then start having fun with it, trying to change it.
There's nothing new under the sun.
No, not
is
at all.
what Chuck Berry said, who wrote Johnny Be Good, the start of which is very similar to an old 1940s blues song where it was played, I can't remember what song it's called, but it was played on a saxophone or a clarinet. It's just the start of Johnny Be Good, but there you go. So hopefully those things have helped you. We're going to have a little jam now. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe to both the Andy Guitar YouTube channel and the Your Guitar Academy YouTube channel to because we're ping-ponging between the channels for all our uploads of another guitar show. Hope to see you guys next time. Bye for now.